Corn Laws is a unique journal entry. Historically, the Corn Laws were a series of British tariffs and trade restrictions on imported food, particularly American corn, between 1815 and 1846. The goal was obviously to shore up grain producers of Britain, who were struggling at the time. In Victoria 3, however, Corn Laws is quite possibly the most sought-after journal entry in the game. In a way, it's also considered to be, by many, the most overpowered and most in need of a direct nerf since it goes against the spirit of the game in their eyes. Ironically, the country that Corn Laws historically directly affected the most, Ireland, is one of the few countries in the game of Victoria 3 that can't even get Corn Laws due to starting off with protectionism and not mercantilism or isolationism. Great Britain can't even enact Corn Laws either, thanks to the exact same reason, which again, makes me chuckle. What I find especially unique about Corn Laws is the fact that nobody can truly agree on what it should be widely considered. Some consider it to be an intended function of the game, meant to shore up weaker nations to compete on the world stage with the larger ones. Some would call it cheese, because it weakens the spirit of the game's politics by making one action superior to all others. Some would simply call it meta, and equate it to building 50-50 army makeups of infantry and artillery with a heavy barrage commander. Then again, recently, some people have actually accused it of being an exploit, especially when people go through great lengths in their playthroughs to enact it. Before we begin, I want you to understand that this is purely an opinion-based video, so you're going to have to take everything I'm about to say with a grain of salt. This is not intended to be the final verdict for every single person out there. You can still continue to have your discussions on what Corn Laws actually is. However, going forward, depending on my verdict, it'll determine whether or not I continue to include it in my personal no cheese list when I make no cheese videos or do no cheese live streams. So, with that out of the way, take some time to like and subscribe, then make sure to leave a comment screaming about how wrong I am about everything I've ever said or done. I still appreciate you guys. You guys are kings. Now, let's begin. Corn Laws clearly has a purpose, otherwise it would have been completely removed rather than simply nerfed in the previous patches. Countries like Persia, for instance, would have an especially difficult time catching up, let alone competing on the world stage without the use of Corn Laws to quickly modernize their painfully backwards countries. And, in Persia's case, doing so with horrifically low qualifications. The devs obviously intended there to be consequences to going for Corn Laws. The aristocratic power bonuses were there to depict this, and even if it eventually makes the economic laws much easier to pass and modernize, it can easily backfire when trying to go for governance principle or voting laws that the landowners or aristocrats despise. Devolving into a royalist revolution is not uncommon for players who still haven't bothered to get free market and try to swap from monarchy to republic. Yet, it just feels as if the punishments associated with going for Corn Laws aren't strong enough to serve as a true deterrent, or even a trade-off. Instead, most of them can be safely ignored, especially since there are small wage bonuses associated with Corn Laws too. Obviously, the fact that Corn Laws still exists, even in 1.8, showcases that the developers absolutely want this journal entry to remain in the game to serve as a quick modernizing tool for the painfully weak countries out there. Yet, there always just seems to be new ways for the already large, powerful countries to make use of it too. Russia and Great Qing both have methods to make use of the Corn Laws, where the main crux of the next argument comes from. I hate to break it to you guys, but Victoria 3 isn't particularly well balanced in a lot of aspects. Population, by far, is the greatest determining factor as to whether or not a country is going to reach 1 billion GDP. So it's very simple to reason that countries who start with astounding amounts of population in the early game are powerful. So let's face it, I don't think the devs intended Qing or Russia to ever make use of Corn Laws. The last few patches seem to have done everything in their power to distance both Qing and Russia from going for Corn Laws, without going so far as to give them protectionism or adding even more clauses to the enactment of Corn Laws that they can't fulfill. The sheer power from population, acceptance, and resources for each of these countries already dwarfs the supposed penalties associated with being a backwards country with relatively poor technology and a huge amount of peasants. Being able to quickly modernize as either one of those countries easily falls into the category of what I call cheese, and I am in full agreement when it comes to this. It removes the majority of the barriers put in place by the developers to make modernizing those countries a challenge, and as such, it quickly devolves the game into a map painting simulator far earlier than it should. This is great if you are a new player and you do want to experience being super powerful when you started off as a slightly weaker country for the first time. In fact, I continually remind players that they shouldn't listen to other people when it comes to commentary like cheese or exploits. You should focus only on what you find fun, and the opinions of others should never hamper that fun. There are people out there who still enjoy switching between countries, and while I don't enjoy doing that myself, more power to them if they find it fun. However, the comparison of corn laws to country switching is very unfair. In fact, it actually brings me to my next argument. Country switching is, for the lack of a better word, a deliberate, working as intended action. It is not an exploit. Doing so, however, disables your ability to get achievements, so it's obvious that Paradox doesn't want you doing so unless it's for your own personal amusement. Corn laws, in a way, is very similar to that. However, I consider the comparison between the two to be unfair. Corn laws still allows you to get achievements, while country switching does not. Perhaps that might be why people consider corn laws to not be cheese or working as intended, but rather to be an outright exploit. There have been recent advents of releasing countries or gifting states specifically to make getting corn laws possible in countries where it normally would not be, such as with Qing releasing Formosa after moving the market capital and deleting the ports. Well, it certainly does seem as if we are veering dangerously close into the territory of exploits. These are clearly not game mechanics being used as intended. One could make the argument that it can still happen even without moving the market capitals or deleting the ports. You can still force corn laws in Qing with enough dedication and enough nationalization. On top of that, even if moving market capitals and deleting ports are working as intended, and even if they're being used consecutively in a way that produces a result that wasn't intended, it doesn't actively abuse weaknesses in the code, but rather just weaknesses in design. To me, it would be like calling combos in fighting games exploits because they originally made use of weaknesses in the design of Street Fighter 2. As such, I can in good faith call corn laws an exploit. It's a failure of design, not an issue with the coding itself. One would likely take a look at my inclusion of meta in the arguments as a misnomer or redundancy. I already included cheese, right? Well, I consider cheese and meta to be two different things. Meta is generally just referring to the prevailing strategies that are within the spirit of the game, while cheese generally refers to unfair strategies that go against the spirit of the game. They border each other on a spectrum, but they're not the same. Now, for me, this comes to the most interesting argument for corn laws. Are corn laws meta? Yes, but also no. Without a doubt in my mind, if corn laws aren't explicitly banned in a multiplayer game, you will see it being enacted by everybody and their mother through any means that they can manage. It is the first order optimal action for most, if not all players. First order optimal refers to the ease of an action and the value in taking it. It's not the most obvious choice, but once someone learns a game's nuances, it becomes the guarantee choice. Think of Magneto's zero-frame crouching light kick for first hit at the beginning of a match in Marvel vs. Capcom 2 for a good example. Perhaps the reason why corn laws itself is being completely hated by so many people is because it has become the #1 meta. It is the most effective tactic available for early game growth after all. In regards to countries like Persia, where it is not only extremely simple to enact corn laws with a few easy button clicks, but it is pretty much imperative to do so, yes, I consider this purely to be meta personally. It is within the spirit of the game here. Persia needs it. However, would I consider corn laws to be meta first and cheese second for every single country? Well, no. There are still countries where its use requires a huge amount of ridiculous steps that just feel wrong. Again, coming back to Qing releasing Formosa, in that case, no, it does not meet the requirements of being meta. It actually goes against the spirit of the game. It literally forces you to release a vassal that you would normally never release under any circumstances just to give yourself access to the Corn Laws journal entry. Once more, this action actually veers much closer to being an exploit than meta. One could even make the argument that it is unfair due to how highly effective it is for a country that probably shouldn't have ever been given access to corn laws in the first place. So could I call it meta? Unfortunately, I'm going to be very wishy-washy on this front. Are there some countries where corn laws is likely working as meta? Yes, there are. Some. What about cases where it was clearly nerfed and yet we still find ways to enact it? No, I don't think I can call it meta at this point. It is simply too unfair in some cases, especially in multiplayer. So, on my newly made scale of working as intended, meta, cheese, or exploit, I think corn laws safely fits in the cheese category for most countries. Despite the clearly intended design choices being put into place, there are simply too many possibilities where corn laws is being used by countries it was never intended for, in fact, was even nerfed for. Obviously, in the future, I might make exceptions to this rule, particularly with exceptionally weak countries who absolutely need corn laws to succeed, like Bagirmi or Persia. Yet, there is no doubt in my mind that countries like Brazil or Russia or Japan should never be able to enact it. It is simply too powerful, and it removes any challenge for modernizing the economy for those countries. Of course, at the end of the day, this is just my opinion. My opinion shouldn't really affect how you play your game or how you think about a certain subject. The only effect that this should have is whether or not corn laws remains on my no cheese list. Well, my final verdict is that corn laws will remain number 1 on my no cheese list. Not only do I consider it cheese, I consider it to be the most important cheese, rightfully placed at number 1. Thank you for watching this far into the video. I sincerely hope you at least enjoyed my subjective ranting on corn laws. If you're new here, I typically do guides and playthroughs, so if you're actually interested in that sort of thing, take some time to watch my most recent no cheese playthrough of Shiwa, where I turn it into a tall, powerful Ethiopia with historical borders. Anyhow, I hope you keep enjoying playing Victoria 3 in spite of my rants. Good night, and always remember, Hail Hydra Cat.